First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Volodymyr. I represent Protemos company. We develop software both for freelance translators and for translation agencies. Our product helps both the translator and the project manager save time. So, as Kirill mentioned, before coming to Protemos, I used to manage processes at Technolex. And still, this is one of the largest Ukrainian translation companies. And I will tell you more about one of the reasons that helped us to grow. Among other things, I will talk about how we scaled the business. Let me begin by finding out if this is relevant. Raise your hand if you are from a translation agency. Okay, two people. Great, the rest are freelancers, right? So I'm hoping that this will also be useful for you. So I would say that at some point any company, any translation agency finds itself struggling with this issue when they are lacking people, when they're lacking highly qualified linguists. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you never had to deal with this. If you've never had to deal with this, because you have, right? So how do you go about it? And what is there to do? Because the reports that you're getting, all the analytics, the consulting companies, what they're saying to you is that the industry is growing, and that regardless of the innovations, of all that high-tech neural network solutions, the demand keeps growing, and so is the industry. So does the industry. So what are the ways to address this if you are a translation agency? First of all, you are introducing a very detailed and scrupulous recruitment process. You screen your candidates until you find one or two translators out of 100, because a lot of the applicants are actually lacking the understanding of what translation actually is. It's a very painstaking process. It takes a lot of time. And if you need to recruit fast, this will not work for you.
Another option is to just hire high stars. They're usually expensive ones. Usually they're freelancers that have been working for a long time on the market and they're famous. Or to use headhunting and just to hunt personnel from competitors. But it's quite an expensive method, and usually projects just achieve zero level if they use this method. And if applied, it could really destroy psychological atmosphere among your staff, because just such stars could destroy any atmosphere and have negative attitude to your personnel. The third method is also a long term, but in strategic terms, this method is the most correct one. It really works. And it works for scale up of your production. Why? Because due to the fact that there are not enough highly qualitative and professional linguists just on the market for with affordable price. You should train your staff, and this method works. Also, it needs a lot of time, but finally, it just works and it worth the time. But prior to sharing with you information about this method, please look at this diagram. It's just a standard working flow of quality of LPS. What happens usually? It could, of course, such flow could verify. There could be different stages, more or less, but the notion in general is the same. We have a translator who translates. Then we have quality checks. We have editor, we have proofreader who just proofread. Sometimes this is one person that combines two positions, and finally there is automatic check by means of verifical or similar tools, and then the file goes to the client. The client is satisfied, the project is closed, and nothing happens. So, and everybody just forgets about such project. What do you think? What is the problem here? Okay. What happens with translator under such method, under such circumstance? Yes, absolutely correct. Translator gains nothing. He or she doesn't know about anything. Maybe he or she would like to gain new knowledge, skills, to be trained, to just learn lessons, but there is no feedback for translator. There is no just interconnection in general. Yes, so such person works, thinks that he or she is doing everything right, but afterwards the translation goes to editor, and editor just blames translator with on of everything. How it's possible to do one and the same mistake for the 50th or the 100th time again, and it leads to the results to the situation with no feedback. Translator doesn't know about such feedback, and if he or she makes some mistakes constantly, his or she receives no feedback and thinks that everything is correct. And if this translator works for many, many years, and he or she could consider him or herself like a highly professional translator, but at the same time, this translator makes a lot of simple mistakes, and then new skills or habits just are gained by such translator, and maybe on some stage due to some neuropsychological and physical reasons, this translator finally, in many years, will not be able to be trained or to learn something new at all, or he will be dissatisfied if some such mistakes will be explained to this translator. If in some companies translators don't receive any feedbacks, then finally, later or earlier, we will have a team that is not capable for development, but and company is not capable for development. Company is not capable to scale up its production. Why? Because translators, because company can't just train new personnel. If company gets new clients, new orders, with huge volume, but company doesn't have necessary personnel, necessary staff, because previous the company hadn't trained people for doing this work. That's why feedbacks are needed. It's very important for each participant. On this slide, you could observe how it could work. I have discussed issues with many representatives of LPS, and really they have something similar, those who really work with quality, who really work on quality. So the essence of the slide is the following. There is a translator, and he or she sends files to manager, to the editor, and editor could do not only editing, but also sends feedback, maybe a list of mistakes, maybe some recommendations, assessments, maybe, and afterwards editor sends it to the manager, and manager sends this feedback to the translator. In the best case, translator agrees and makes conclusions. But conclusions translator makes all the time. But translator could send this file with his or her comments to the manager. Manager sends this file to editor. Editor sometimes smiles, sometimes is just dissatisfied and comments and sends back. So there could be several stages or steps till they achieve necessary results. And this process solves the problem of training. So translator is trained by his or her mistakes. The quality rises. Editor in perspective will have less work because there will be no need to correct something that was corrected previously. And in general, the performance indicators of the company increase, and the company trains the next generation of highly professional linguists, and they could rise their potential. What is the problem here on this slide? How do you think? From all perspectives, manager is under attack from all the sides. And we could look at the smile of the manager, and this icon doesn't smile at all. So manager is not happy at all with this burden, with these functions. Because from my own experience, I could say that I have tried to implement this system in Technolex. I have told the managers to do like this, send all the time these files, do this evaluation and assessment, and just in some time, passing some time, I found out that this evaluation is being done only in 10% of cases. All other cases just go without any assessment and feedback. And when I asked, I received just standard answer. There is no time. When I should do it, I should find a translator, I should finish the project and deadlines and many tasks. So I couldn't say anything against their comment. They prioritized it correctly, so they did the job what they should have done. But this process wasn't like an additional burden, and if they have had time for it, so they did it. If not, they just missed the stage, this process, and only just a very small percentage of work really was evaluated. But I didn't agree with it. And also, being a SEO, I didn't see the general picture, the general image as to the translators. I didn't understand who is great, who is not. So I needed to do the manual work to come to each manager and ask how this translator is, how not. So we didn't have any unified database, and so everything was very diverse, and we worked using our intuition. And I knew at that time already that our company will grow. So I asked myself how to. So what should I do in order to implement this process? But managers, but without such a high burden of work for these managers, of this burden of this unnecessary monkey work. That's why we have come to this project of audit, of automized audit. On the slide you could see how it works. It's almost the same, but all this work, all this routine work is done by system, by robot. So the manager only creates, defines a task to evaluate work of such a translator, to assess translation. And then the task is defined, the work is being started, and the manager just forgets about it. The manager should not check it all time, day by day, in a day or an hour or in several days. The manager receives final conclusion. System does all the work, sends messages, emails, anonymous communication between a manager and a translator makes all reports, quality reports, and so the same goals are being achieved but with less efforts. In technology, for example, there is no at all such quality department. There is a manager or a person that supervises such quality checks, but all the work is being done by the system. Then I will show you some information about the system. I will tell you how it works. So, in such a just cartoon mode, I've prepared my presentation. Everything starts from the station. For example, manager would like to have quality check of a specific translator. Manager just makes a request in the system to evaluate such translation. Just manager inserts all the data, who is a translator, who will be an evaluator. You could just add tertiary part if there is a disagreement, and maybe this part will decide who is right or not. And maybe you could add some instructions for evaluator. And afterwards, manager just goes for a coffee break, forgets about this project, and manager doesn't need to look at this data at all. Then, system just writes to the editor or evaluator in this case, please evaluate work of this, evaluate this or that translation. And editor receives such an email, dear Mr. John, please give your evaluation for quality of translation of this translator. Editor takes source and target text, editing and post-editing text, and just downloads it to the system. It gives a request to the system to compare these files. System needs several seconds to compare this text, and then the report is submitted. The report looks like this. There is a search line, there is a source line, post-editing line, and post-editing line. As soon as this report is being generated, the system sends an email to the translator that please look at these corrections to your translation. And so it needs just several seconds. All everything is done immediately. No one should spend any time on it. But immediately and simultaneously, of course, it could depend on just structure of different companies. But if you would like to have an evaluation, the system allows an editor to classify mistakes by in terms of Lisa standards. Each mistake is being classified. You just capture any fragment, for example, 500 words, and an editor classifies all mistakes captured by within this segment. For example, such severe terminology mistakes, mistakes of punctuality, grammar mistakes, and so different types of mistakes, and system just evaluates level of quality by using specific formula, and standards of quality could be changed, but the essence of this formula is that the quantity of mistakes is being calculated for just 1,000 words conditionally. How many mistakes are allowed to have appropriate level of quality? Then we could have just gradation of this quality, like excellent, good, disapproved, and so on, so on. So you could just change and customize your criteria, as the system is very flexible one. Afterwards, as soon as we have this mistakes classification and editor finishes this evaluation, the editor presses the button evaluation is finished, and the system immediately sends an email to the translator. Dear translator, please look at your evaluation. You have such score. Your translation is appropriate. Please look at your mistakes and make some conclusions. So there are two ways of further work, and the first way is a translator agrees with this, and it's not a good option because very often translators just even don't look at this file and just agree, and that's all. That's why that's a bad option. But also, translator could just disagree with it. For example, you have indicated this terminology mistake, but I've just used your own glossaries, but please, so that's why that's not a mistake, or the grammar mistake, but according to the rules of some grammar rules, there is this comma is needed here, so they start discussion actually. The translator after translator makes some comments to this file, translator sends this file to the system. The editor again receives this email and with the comments of translator goes to the system, looks at this file, and so they have such a dialogue. They just discuss on each and every mistake. You could, in the system, you could just define some settings as to the how many tries could be for a translator for this disagreement. It should not be unlimited discussion because it's production process, operational process, and we have some and it's time limited and budget limited. That's why we could define here how many tries the translator has for such disagreement discussions. And if we could also define if there is no final agreement between them, then the translator could submit this project evaluation of this project for arbitrary court, so-called. What is it, arbitrary court? Is it like a third-party, third linguist that evaluates and reads all these clauses of disagreement, reads and makes final conclusion, who is right or who is not, and we have a final evaluation. The final evaluation just is delivered, submitted to the manager, and manager receives it, could look through or read it, and manager's work is done here. And you could see here this discussion is anonymous here. Translator and editor don't know names of counterparties. Why to anonymize it? Because we could have bias in attitude for different people, and that's why due to different circumstances, score could be biased by attitude of the evaluator. For example, they could be friends, or they could have had disagreement just the day before, or the editor knows that he or she evaluates her chief, and so on, so on. So it could be different situations.
That's why this whole process is anonymized. Of course, it cannot prevent being recognized completely, because usually when you work with text, when you edit someone's work, you can often recognize the translator from the style. And yet, we tried to do what we could to preserve that anonymity. Anyhow, when the evaluation is over, the manager gets the report, and this basically ends the project. So what I've been talking about for the past 15 minutes is happening without the participation of the manager. So if they do projects like this, they could do 500 of them a day, because all they need to do is identify the participants and press the button. It saves a lot of time, but that's not it. The whole bulk of data, all the evaluations that are sent back to the translators, they are aggregated in the database. They do not just disappear. And so then we can generate the statistics, the performance statistics per translator, as well as per evaluator. On this slide, you can see how we rate or how the system rates the translators based on the average monthly score, for example. Here you can see who is excellent, who is doing okay, who is delivering satisfactory performance, or maybe there's someone you should actually say goodbye to because, or you could try talking to them, maybe somehow help them improve performance. We can also generate similar reports for the evaluators, like I said, so that you could see maybe there is an evaluator who gives them very poor evaluations, or on the contrary, is very generous. So you can see how this correlates if the translator is being rated, receives a low score because he's not or she's not doing well, or maybe just they are not lucky to have this evaluator. So you can try to tell that from this piece of statistics. Another quality report for translator, like I said, we keep all the evaluations, and you can see how their dynamics change over time. Here, for example, starting from 2014, this translator has been receiving evaluations. The yellow line is the average for the company, and the red line is their performance. So you can see how they are progressing, or on the contrary, regressing, losing quality over time. In other words, we try to see if they are capable of learning, actually, and then we compare their performance to the average performance for the company. Are they doing better or worse? This way we get a clear picture organization wise. For example, when we are snowed under with the orders and we need more editors, then we could promote some of the translators. And also, this way we can monitor the quality of the newly recruited people. We can also break down errors per translator. Here you can see that 22% of errors have to do with style, then goes the accuracy. What else? Some of the errors have to do with non-compliance with the client requirements and so on. So this way we can look at the performance of a specific translator and do not just evaluate it generally, like you should try to do your job better or you're doing great, because this is actually not very constructive. It doesn't get you anywhere. But if you're doing the evaluation this way, then at the end of the quarter or the reporting period, you can say, okay, you're doing well in general. At the same time, you're somehow struggling with the spelling. Maybe we should revisit the spell check, maybe. Or if you put your commas, for example, according to the rules of the English language, maybe you should revisit this and this guidance and try to improve your performance. Also, if you present your evaluation this way, the translator themselves can see how they are doing. Are you talking about the TQ auditor profile or the Protemos? Both, because they're integrated, and TQ auditor has also the API that you could use to connect from outside, from a different system. Because in Protemos, for example, you can use Protemos to create a TQ auditor project without actually using the software. You just press the button in your Protemos interface without having to log in TQ auditor. Even this portion of this work that I have just shown you does not entail any actions on the part of the manager of that sort. So you can just do everything you need from your Protemos profile, so there's even less work for the manager to do. Then another quick question from me. Looks like this list of translators is stored in the TQ auditor profile of the company, right? Yes, that is correct. So in other words, this is like a resource management system of a sort, which started out as just comparison of two different files. Yes, the project actually, it has a long history. Yes, even before they changed Tracker, if you know my history, and then you probably know that a similar system, I tried to develop a similar system, even before I came to Technolex, but that thing didn't work out. So, but we managed it here, and you're right. We started with just the comparison, and as far as I understand, there's many freelancers here on this terrace, so you could use this system. You don't have to be a translation agency. You can do it for free. You can compare your files, or you can have the editor compare your files. For example, you edit it yourself, and then you need to be sure that you didn't introduce any additional errors, because somehow this could happen, because sometimes this happens when you change something and then it changes or distorts the grammar throughout. So you could use this function of the tool that I just presented. Now back to the slides. Anyway, just to sum up what I have just said, why do we need all this? At Technolex right now, we are trying to check every delivery that exceeds 500 words. And in practice, usually it translates into about a half of what we get back from the translators, because the file format does not always allow you to upload it into the TQ auditor, or sometimes there are some exporting restrictions. But anyhow, we're trying to do this whenever we can. As to the question of why we do this, your client pays you, why bother? Because at the very least, you need to keep your editor busy, right? You need to have them evaluating. No, of course you don't do that, because there's always a shortage of editors. Okay, for example, we have this project of 10,000 words, and say you decide to do a random check of 1,000. How much longer would it take for the editor to check whatever they can check, provided that the format permits? Does this make the process more complicated? Well, as a rule, one check takes about half an hour, because if you sample that 1,000 of words, regardless of whether it was a 10,000 or just 500 words project, if it's 500, you just take them. And what does the editor do? Do they just select the error type, or do they explain why they rate it as such, or what? Well, usually they just rate it as they just classify the error. And then if there is a discussion, then this is when the details come up. By the way, you need to always remember about the quality of the communication between the translator and your editor, because, when they say, where did you find that editor? Or I translated it as such because I believe that this is what it should be translated. So you need to make sure to identify comments like that, and if you come across anything of this sort, then you need to contact that translator or the author of those statements and explain to them that this is not the way you do it at your company, that you need to be civilized at all times. Anyway, the evaluations, all those numerous manual evaluations, they mean additional costs. I'm often asked, why do we need to do this? And I say it depends on your perspective. From the standpoint of the tactics, it helps you save if you don't go through with the project. But strategically, It helps you grow. It helps your translators to grow and learn to communicate. And the editor too, by the way, because when their ratings or when their evaluation is challenged by the translator, that will actually make the editor doing it more carefully next time. And this helps you reduce the number of errors on stage one. For example, if any one of your clients wants to save money, they say, I don't need the full cycle, I just need the translation. And this will mean that this translation will be of a higher quality because the translator wants to do it better. And this takes me to the second bullet point of my list. This is motivation. The statistics that we have proves that about 95%, we didn't measure it specifically, but about 95% of the translators, they actually like the feedback, because if the feedback is respectful, if it is accurate and fact-based, when they get this list of errors, usually the translator appreciates this because it helps them to grow. Plus, if they have some professional pride, say, because everybody wants to think of themselves as professionals, right? And then if they see that they make this error and then they know that they can do better, it motivates them to work on the quality, to improve performance, and somehow this actually helps you retain your people because they know that you will give them the feedback and you will train them and you will help them grow at least for a while. This will motivate them to stay with you. Of course, there are exceptions because the exceptions are always there, right? Somebody might get really resentful, right? There's always this person on the team. Okay, I have a question. I'm Misha from Kiev. So you mentioned the additional costs. What did you mean by that? I'm on the full cycle. But if it's still the same editor, they can do the evaluation, they can rate the errors, right? They can classify them. Because I think I've misunderstood. I thought it's some additional piece of work that needs to be done. So it's not a separate task. It is just the what you do to complete editing, right? Yes, this is part of the editor's job. When we send something for editing, we tell them you need to do the evaluation too. Okay, then I misunderstood because I thought it's like a separate task. Well, you do it within the same process. You could have a different person evaluate the translation other than the editor. But I think this is the best way to do it, to rate the translation right after you edit it. Like I said, there are exceptions. Some people are not responding well to criticism, especially if they've been in the field for 10 years, for example. They work for a company where they were this most competent linguist, especially if it wasn't a translation company. And so they come work for you, and then they get this report with all those errors, and that says that they are below the required level. That is very annoying for them, and some could get very angry and say that, no, I'm not working with you ever again after this feedback. But you have to be prepared for this. Take it easy, because if there are projects that do not require a feedback, you could actually have this niche, like a separate tag, and you use those translators for those projects. That way you could avoid the conflict. For example, you might see that they could be right for this project, and then there's no feedback involved. So this is where they belong, and not give them other assignments. because the zero tolerance to criticism is really actually one of the signs that this person might not be able to develop. From the standpoint of the neurophysiology, this is a dominant type of the personality, dominant personality type, who tend to these people, they tend to, usually they are expecting to get more than they deserve. But then there's this question of whether you really need this person on your team long term. But anyway, my bullet point number 3 is the automation of the evaluation process, because this really helps your manager save a lot of time, because this way they don't have to go and ask somebody to do things. They just press the button and the system does it for them. Well, this was it from me. If you are curious, if you want to learn more, visit our website. You could also email me directly or contact me, whichever way is convenient for you. I will be happy to tell you more about the system if you are interested in it. If you have any questions right now, I'll be happy to address them. So you mentioned that the manager just clicks that button or presses that button, and then he sends this evaluation to the translator. And say I'm an editor, my working day is packed, and then I receive this email, this request to evaluate the translation. What are my options here? If I'm the staff editor, then I will most likely do it, right? But if I am not your staff member, well, this depends on how you organize the process. Okay, in other words, do you pay for this extra? Yes, of course. Well, this is the job of the editor. Okay, but this notification to the editor, does it contain any mention about the budget for this assignment? Is there a payment request? Well, we have this half an hour corporate standard. There are certain exceptions, of course, if the translation is really bad, if you have to fix every sentence, then of course it takes longer. And if it does, then the editor knows that there is no point in going any further. If it's bad, it's bad, right? But usually it takes about half an hour. And when the manager sends the assignment to the editor, they also they understand that it will take them half an hour, regardless of whether the editor is on our staff. This is how we do it. This is part of the job. Same as for the translator. Part of their job is to do that QA check using the Verifica tool or Xbench or whatever, Xbench, whatever they need to use, but they need to do it. This is how we organize the process.
It means that 1,000 words of translation text, but there could be just corrections into segments with 200 words. And there could be 5 real mistakes, and as all other mistakes are just some small editing or corrections. And usually, if there is a high-level translation, then there will be some mistakes, just few mistakes. In the nearest time, we will have update of the version, and how auditor works. So, for example, in your project, there are 10,000 of words. 10,000 of words. There are all the segments with corrections, and among these segments with corrections, we have some randomized choice. It's how it works. Like right now, I think in several weeks we will have a separate option to start from this point. Just historically, it happens that earlier, in the beginning, we'll have such algorithm to check the first 1,000 of words. But then translators understood this formula, and and thousands or 1,000 of words is just being translated perfectly, and afterwards the quality just decreases significantly. Uh, Also, the system could just check a segment without mistakes at all, or a segment with high level of mistakes. That's why we decided to change the formula. We decided to take all the corrections and then just choose some number or such corrections for classifications. There is a special formula to calculate the proportions. If you made for 10,000 of words mistakes only in one segment of 2,000 of words, anyway, the system will find these mistakes and the system will include them into calculation. And but of course, yes, it will include and consider that this in the segment of 2,000. But it's no way to that the system checks segment without no mistakes at all, only this one. But the general formula 20 mistakes per 1,000 of words. Who checks the editors? Is there any super editor for editors? Is there a rating for editors? It's not like a score rating, but it's a similar report for editors. We just we collect statistical data, and we could identify which editor puts some scores more or less, and for individual translators there could be a segment or in the report which scores translator receives from each of the editors. And if a translator has a low level of scores, and for these ones the translator is being checked by different editors, and in the report we could see that this translator is being checked by 5 editors. 4 of them put a high score, and the fifth one puts the low score. But this editor checked the major part of work for this translator. So we could just find this correlation. We could identify how the editors have biased or non-biased attitude for just giving higher score or lower score. But if there is such a situation, if the client is not satisfied and with the translation, whether it influences on the score of the editor, because this editor actually is more responsible for the project. But this is another process. This work with claims from the client. But afterwards, finally, it could be considered. We could just look at the project, what is the score was for the project. If the editor defined everything like an excellent, but there is a disagreement from the client, if there is a claim from the client, and the claim from the client is also should be considered whether it's objective one or non-objective one. And if there are if there is a clear claim from the client and there are mistakes, real mistakes, then internal investigation should be done. But if we could understand that the client doesn't understand the standards, then we should discuss it with the client. First of all, I would like to just to give you a reference to you to say thank you. And prior one day to this presentation, we have said that we may be one of the companies that spent on the system check the huge amount of money, more than all the companies in Ukraine. But I could see that we are not alone here, and it really worth of it, and it's really paid off and being rewarded. And I would like to ask you, we have told you that our system is different, but it works differently, but actually they are similarly, and great minds think similarly actually. But the question is, usually for each linguist we just check different texts. So we prepare reports. Usually these are 5 months of period during which we collect texts, and the 6 months we submit reports to these translators and linguists. But if so for example, we have discussed developed different tools But if you go with a translator for coffee break, it's very difficult to evaluate, and we understand that evaluation will influence on money compensation for the translators. And what we tried a lot, we tried to make anonymous style, but an editor knows the style of translator. The editor could identify each translator. Do you have any internal methods to just avoid this problem? We have said, I have said already that communication is anonymous, but of course, for 100%, it's impossible to have this evaluation non-biased. We tried to anonymize this discussion. So we don't have names here. We have evaluator and translator. But of course, style could be defined, or they could sit somewhere near each other, just type, and then there could be leak of information, and then each of them really knows who evaluates whom. I don't know actually what to do with this problem. The second is objectivity. Each editor evaluates in his or her own manner. That's why we have scores for editors, and we try to work with this problem. We try to discuss with the editors, please, that for example you are too strict, or this editor you are not too strict. You should identify and define each mistakes. We can't have this in the text, such mistakes. I think that's more a problem and issue of corporative culture. How people could just abstain from this friendly relations. Because this, for example, the discussions on the slides, they could use bad language, they could just swear, and you could say, who are you, what are you doing, and so where did you take this editor, have you been trained or not at all. So the system can't exclude such possible case, but all these problems could be solved by administrative methods and charges, and by notion of corporate culture at all. Because if there is normal to have evaluation in the standard non-biased manner, then such problem will not exist. Because if a person thinks, an editor thinks, oh, that's my friend, I have drank a beer in the pub with him, and I would just score him high level, then so the system should do something with it. Thank you.